What's up, people? I know I said at the end of third hour on Friday that I didn't quite get through everything that you need for that assignment, so I want to make sure that I recorded something for you so that you are ready to go. So, big thing though is remember, I wrote it in boomer language for you, or however that works. Is that what you call it? I don't know. But these are the most important. If you have good knowledge questions, you will probably have a good start to your essay. So, knowledge questions are questions about knowledge, and they contain the following. So, three things. And I put them, this is actually from the IB people. I didn't make this. If you're super impressed, I apologize, but I did not make the little bubble thing right here. So, anyway, they have to be about knowledge, which means instead of focusing on content specific information like what were the um, most important or significant factors that led to the American Revolution, for example, instead of being something like that, it would have to broaden out to something that is more applicable to an entire discipline or an entire area of knowledge. So, for example, if you take that cause question about the American Revolution, you can broaden it out to like, how do historians determine causation in history? So, like looking at the production of that knowledge would be what would be happening. It also has to be open-ended, so there's got to be several plausible answers and varying perspectives that you can bring in and counterclaims you can make against your claim. So it has to be something that doesn't have one right answer. And then it also has to be relatively general, which means rather than using subject-specific terms like causation in history or causation in the American Revolution, we look at like cause and effect overall. So that one I gave, that was that question about history. We could also, if we wanted to, bring in how do we establish causation in natural sciences? How do we establish causation within mathematics when you're looking at things like proofs and deductive reasoning. So something general that's not very subject specific. So not looking at like placebo effect, for example, is very subject specific, but looking at correlation and causation would help you understand the placebo effect. So anyway, moving on from there. I gave it some examples from this article from The Atlantic way back in 2013 when I was just a young lad of 24. Yeah. Yep. hmm So they look at economic models and how models in economics are fashioned after human behavior that supposes or assumes, based on their faith of their discipline, that humans will be rational. And that isn't always the case. In fact, a lot would argue that it's very rarely the case. So I had a number of knowledge questions that I developed regarding this concept that I tried to broaden out into big knowledge questions. So first off, can human sciences be considered coherent sciences if experts disagree? So when we talk about truth and relative truth and objective truth, one of the types of truths is coherent truth, which means that across sources, it makes, sorry, not across sources, that it makes sense within that discipline, that you can reason through it, and that's coherently, like you put the thought process into it and it makes sense. So can we have a coherent truth in human sciences if experts are disagreeing about things? The other one is TWE, is to what extent, which is a good thing to use if you are trying to figure out how to make a knowledge question. The only thing that I would say though is that if you make a to what extent question, you have to make sure that you answer the to what extent question, which means you're going to have to talk about, is it a little bit, a lot of it, not very much, good, bad, not really sure how good or bad it is, so mediocre, so you have to be able to do that. So anyway, this question is, to what extent do underlying assumptions determine the accuracy of models in the area of knowledge of human sciences? So thinking about models and how they work in human sciences, maybe as compared to how models work in mathematics or in statistical realms of mathematics or physics or something like that. Does the development of knowledge in a discipline undermine or strengthen the coherence of a discipline? So when we talk about how within a discipline you tend to have new knowledge formed, does that tend to make people question what they know within that discipline, or does it tend to help strengthen what people know in that discipline, or create what's called like intellectual solidarity? And then, if science is a method for constructing knowledge, how can ways of knowing contribute to scientific knowledge? So, what are the ways that we utilize thought in different ways and different ways of knowing to try to develop our methodology within a discipline? So those are 4 knowledge questions. Generally, you want to have maybe like 2 or 3 from a real life scenario, but those are some ones that I took away from that article. Notice though that they are generally about knowledge or the process of building knowledge, that they are open-ended and that they're fairly general. They're not super focused on one discipline or one specific situation. If you're like, hey, I literally would like to have some ideas for just how to develop knowledge questions that aren't super abstract that I have to really, really like think about for a long time. And I would caution that it's always a good idea to think about things, but here's some ways just when you're starting out to try to think about how can I build a better knowledge question. So strategy number one would be to broaden the concepts or ideas being discussed into being representative of an entire area of knowledge or a comparison of areas of knowledge. So, for example, you could say, how is blank, whatever it is, whatever concept it is from that real life situation, applied differently in human sciences compared to natural sciences? And what are the implications of this difference? We're going to talk about implications later, but just like, why does that matter? Like, what is that going to do for us if we look at how it's different? Because we should be trying to think about how this helps us in our real or academic life or our real academic life, depending on how you think about things. The second thing you can do is you can include various ways of knowing into your question. So in what ways do reason and intuition work together when develop knowledge regarding blank? And again, your blank part there can't be the specific real life situation. It shouldn't just be like a discipline within an area of knowledge. It should be like knowledge regarding how mathematical models are used, or knowledge regarding how scientific experiments are designed, or how people in the human sciences draw conclusions from data, things like that. So you can include various ways of knowing. And then number three is a include a knowledge issue that we explored last time. So what are some knowledge issues related to this topic, and then how can those be brought in as well? So I did a little causation one. This is like a classic example. Whenever you have a real life situation, you're really pressed for a knowledge question. You could say, how do we know that X is causing Y within the area of whatever the situation, whatever the area of knowledge or the real life situation is? So that's a correlation causation. And you can look at, and I guess now that I'm just kind of thinking about it off the cuff here, you don't need to tie yourself to one of these. You should have more than one knowledge question when you are analyzing a situation. You should be able to develop multiple knowledge questions. So don't be afraid to have some ways of knowing, and then also have something that's a comparison of areas of knowledge, and then have a knowledge issue. Okay, so you can do all of those. There's not like a limit on the number of knowledge questions you have. It's just that you have 1,600 words in this essay. So in terms of the essay, you're not going to want to have, 10 knowledge questions that you're going through. So here's some practice for you. So I'd like you to try to fix this. So you might want to pause because I'm not going to like sit here for 5 minutes and wait for you to do it. So each of the following examples is an inquiry question, which means it's specifically a question that we would ask about a specific example or real life situation to understand it better, but they're either not about knowledge, not open, or not general enough to be considered solid knowledge questions. So try to fix it to make it more knowledge based on those strategies that I just gave you. And what I did for my 1A class in team one is I just said, I'll give you the first one. So the first one is about future population growth in Africa. So fix this question. This is an inquiry question, so it doesn't meet the criteria for a knowledge question. So how can we predict future population growth in Africa? That is very specific to the situation. It's not general enough. And it also could be not too open-ended depending on your study of that situation. There's probably just a couple ways to predict that future population growth. So how I would change it is I would say, how can a mathematical model give us knowledge even if it does not yield accurate predictions? Because what they're talking about here is like you're going to predict future population growth, but you might not be correct. So how can those models give us knowledge even if it's not completely accurate, or can it? So thinking about the accuracy and how accurate we need models to be in order to trust them. For example, that first prompt in the 2021 essay prompts is about trust and the element of faith. So pause me and try to do the second one. I'll wait for like 5 seconds. I'm going to move on, but make sure you pause so you can try to work on that placebo one. Okay, so here's the answer for you. This is one way you can do it. So how could we establish that X is an active ingredient in causing Y? So what we've done is we've taken the placebo idea and we've kind of broadened it out. Another thing you could say is like, what role does faith as a way of knowing play in developing conclusions within medicine or within experiments? Because we're relying on people, making assumptions about what's happening within that experiment related to the placebo effect. So that's something you could look at as well. So here's what I'd like you to do. This is like the assignment part of it. So I would like you to write two different knowledge questions for each of the real life situations on the following screen. So there is a link and I'll put them in the assignment as well. But sorry, I'm just thinking about how to send this out. So I want you to write two knowledge questions. Each one has the link to the article. Also, these are some resources I've gathered about knowledge questions, but you have the 3 strategies I just gave you, and you have these resources as well if you'd like to. There's like a graphically presented way of looking at it. There's this guide to knowledge questions from another TOK teacher website and some other examples of real life situations that you develop knowledge questions from. So there is a form, a Microsoft form link, and it's currently in the in-class assignments part of Teams. And I'm just going to reference in the at-home assignment. If you're one of the teams that does it at home, because you had Philosophy Friday, it's going to be the Team 1 people. I'm gonna reference that in the at-home channel. All right, so that's pretty much it. What you got is this unmade bed artwork that was at the Tate Gallery in London in 1999 and was part of the list for the Turner Prize. And in 2014, it sold for 2.5 million euro, which is, I think, about, you'd multiply by 1.25 and you'd get dollars, somewhere around there. I can't do it in my head, I'm sorry. Also the duck-billed platypus, which based on its classification, shouldn't really exist, or scientists didn't believe it could exist. And then I got one about how your postcode or like where you live can change your healthcare effects in Britain, where they have the National Health Service. Okay, so there's